Welcome back to Gloved Up Garage. In this episode, I'll be working on our 98 Cobra project, primarily on the braking system. While the engine is off the stand and at the machine shop getting checked out, I want to work on some of the other systems that don't need the engine here for me to work on. The brake's going to be the easiest system to go ahead and get started, and at least that way I can move the car around, I can stop it if I need to. I went ahead and put the Rotor engine back in the crate. I checked it out with a borescope, and sure enough, there's some damage to the top of the number 8 piston and the underside of the cylinder head on number 8. So nothing I really want to dive into right now. Already got one dual cam 4.6 at a machine shop. So for now, put it back in the crate. We'll get it tucked out of the way. Went ahead and moved everything out of the way so I could get these two crates pushed up against the wall as well. And this is all the stuff that belongs to the Cobra. I've got all the exhaust over here, all my parts, my wiring harnesses, intake manifold, yada yada. It's all over here. Been working on the brakes today, and for those of you guys that don't know or have not worked on these vehicles, in order to get the rotors off of these cars, you actually have to take that caliper bracket off. In this case, it's mounted to the bracket that goes on the axle. You just unbolt it, and then the rotor comes off. On the front, the caliper bracket has to be unbolted from the spindle right here, and then you can get the rotor off the vehicle. So that's what I'm going to be working on today, is the rotors, checking everything out, and seeing if everything is usable or not. With the rotors off the vehicle, and these are the rear rotors specifically, you can get an idea of how worn out the rotors really are. On this vehicle, Mustangs in particular, on the inside of the rotor, there is a minimum thickness, and you can see on this bottom rotor, it's 16.8 millimeters. I think that's kind of an industry standard. Most rotors have that measurement on the inside so that you know if you can have them turned or not. Now it's hard to tell in this angle. That bottom rotor is actually much thicker than the top rotor is. And the bottom rotor right now is measuring out a little over 18 millimeters. The top rotor measuring out at a little over 13 millimeters. So this top one, not going to be usable. It's trash. The bottom one, I could probably have it turned on a brake lathe and save that rotor if I really wanted to. But in this case, it just makes sense to go ahead and replace both rotors. They're not very expensive for these cars. They're roughly about 30 or 40 bucks a piece. It's not going to be the end of the world for me to spend another $40 and replace a rotor. Something that's unique to the Cobras as far as the rear brakes go is you can see that these are vented rotors, meaning that these slots that you can see, they go all the way through to the inside. They allow the heat to flow through this and dissipate the heat off the rotor. So that's something that really helps with spirited driving, cool the brakes off, keep you from glazing the pads and boiling the fluid in your brake system. Now the front rotors on these things, the rear rotors measure a little over 11.5 inches in diameter. So they're taller in diameter than a GT rotor. GT rotors are 10.5 inches, and the GT rotors are solid. So these are larger diameter rotor, which gives you more area, more braking power, and then the venting obviously helps with heat dissipation. Front rotors on a Cobra are 13 inches in diameter, very tall rotor. Again, it helps with braking force and to dissipate the heat a lot quicker. Something that's kind of specific about the front rotors, as you can see, those fins that are down inside of there are slanted towards the rear. This is the left front rotor. These are slanted towards the rear. The right front rotor obviously would be slanted towards the rear on the right front of the vehicle. And again, that is to help dissipate the heat off of the rotor and out of the braking system. Now I was going to go check out the minimum thickness of the front rotor for this is the left front, and I cannot even find the measurement on the inside. It's so rusty. There's a part number here, and I could go look up the part number and pull and find out what the minimum thickness is. In this case, there's a pretty good ridge right here, this part that's still textured and not smooth. It's actually quite a bit raised off of this part of the rotor. There's another ridge on the front, kind of in the same area right here. This is raised. I'm going to say it probably makes sense to go ahead and just replace the rotor. Again, these are like 42 bucks a piece for the front rotors on Rock Auto. I'll just go ahead and order a new set of rotors, front and rear. Before I can start putting all the brakes back on the car, the rotors, and the calipers, something that I want to work on is changing these hub assemblies. This one, the dust cap is tore up quite a bit. It's got a lot of grease leaking out of it, and I really don't know how many miles are on this. So these, they're like 43 bucks on Rock Auto. I prefer to use like a Timken or SKF assembly instead of some of the cheaper ones. So I'll order those up and replace both sides. And we're over to the driver's side now, and you can see that the dust cap is missing on this side. And basically this is just a little cage that pops over top of that nut. You get that off and then get the nut in there and break that loose, and then there's a washer behind it. These don't really pack full of grease like they do on Fox bodies. They basically just sell this as an entire unit, and I think there's just one bearing inside of there instead of two bearings like there is on a Fox body. The ABS tone ring is on the back side of the hub, and that is replaced as a unit, so I won't have to worry about trying to press those rings off and then try to reuse them. The ABS sensor goes through a hole right there in the spindle, and it mounts to the back side. So my goal is to take all this stuff apart, go ahead and get the struts out of here too. I'm probably going to find a different set of struts. I'll look up the part number on these things. They look like just some generic replacements, probably nothing really performance oriented. So I'll see what they are and what they turn out to be. In the meantime, I know I'm going to need a couple of ball joints because it's hard to tell. There's not a lot of light back there, but the ball joints on both sides on the lower parts are pretty much shot. They both look pretty rough. So, and they're not very expensive. I have a hydraulic press here, so I can go ahead and change them. And again, it just makes sense to do that stuff while you've got it all apart. As far as everything else goes, for now, probably wind up changing the springs in the future. I need to get the lower control arms out, obviously, to do the ball joint, but I'll probably go ahead and do the bushings that mount those to the K member as well. The next thing I'll be working on while I'm waiting for the rotors to arrive will be the calipers. This is my left rear caliper. The piston is pretty far outside of the caliper, and I have to get the tool to push that back in, see if I can do it with a C-clamp. These twist as they come out of the bore, so you have to use a tool to kind of twist it and push it back in at the same time. Hopefully it'll be usable and it doesn't leak or anything, and I won't have to buy a new caliper. If I do, the cool thing about this is the caliper is the same on these cars between V6, Cobra, and GT. Really the only difference is the bracket that mounts it, the rotor, and the pads. So that'll be that for the rear. The front calipers, however, are quite a bit different. You can see they're bigger, much larger. This is a 2-piston PBR caliper, and it says Cobra on the front of it. Well, I can send these off, and I can get new calipers from Rock Auto or AutoZone or any parts store. When they rebuild them, though, a lot of times they will run a mill across this and take the Cobra off of the caliper. I don't want to do that. I want to keep it on there. I want to put these back to black, and I want to keep that Cobra in silver so that you can see it's a Cobra. I mean, it's kind of a cool little thing on the brakes. I want to keep that. So my only option is to blow these apart and rebuild them. And basically when you rebuild these calipers, you can see that part right there and that part right there is a seal for the piston. When you step on the brake, fluid comes through here, applies pressure to the 2 pistons that are right here in the bores, moves that pad outward, applies pressure to the inside of the rotor, and then this pad also on the outside applies pressure. So what can happen is the inside of these bores can get worn, they can get scratches, they can wear out. So I'll have to take this all apart and check those bores out and see if they're going to be any good. That will be a separate video of itself because this is pretty intricate and it's a lot of time and a lot of detail that has to go into rebuilding these calipers. The right front caliper looks pretty much the same. They didn't bother to scrape off the Cobra letters, but I'll get that taken care of. And then my right rear caliper, it is pretty clean looking as far as like the e-brake spring goes. But again, I want to get all this red paint off of here. So I'll probably blow these all the way apart, tape off the bores, put them in the blast cabinet and get them back down to, these are cast iron and then these are actually aluminum and I think the brackets are iron too. But anyway, we'll get them all blasted down. We'll get them cleaned up. It'll give me something to do while I'm waiting for the rotors to arrive. I'll explain what I did in that video, in that last clip. I had to put the bleeder screw back in order to allow pressure to build up inside of here to get the pistons out. And what you couldn't see in the video is that I had my finger in between this 2x4 and the caliper. I smashed the tip of my finger. Basically, now you can see that the pistons are pushed out of the bores. I can go ahead and remove these seals, which they're pretty nicked up. Right here where they meet the caliper body, they're in pretty bad shape. So now I can go ahead and pull these pistons out, clean them up, and then check the bores of the caliper itself. I'll have to put the bleeder back in on the left caliper as well. That one was stuck in there pretty good, so that's why I had to use the impact in order to drive that bleeder screw out. I'll just go ahead and tighten it back in with my ratchet and get it snugged up enough to hold pressure when I go to blow these two pistons out. And basically what I'm doing to do that, and basically, well, you got to find a nozzle that's got the rubber tip on it so that it fits inside of there and makes a good seal. That's why the bleeder has to be back in, otherwise it just blows air back out. But you're trying to build up pressure inside of here to force these pistons out. You could do the same thing with hydraulic pressure. I've just found it's easier to do with air pressure. The left front caliper is now completely torn down and ready to be blasted. And what I'll have to do is make sure that I'm very careful when I blast this. Obviously, what grit I use, I don't want to pit this up too much. And I really don't want to get any grit down inside these bores. So these are the pistons. You saw me drive them out. This was this is the upper piston, and I had to kind of tap it out from the backside. It does leave a couple of small marks on it when you do that, but again, the fluid is back here pushing on this. It's not going to really matter. What I'm more concerned about is I'm looking at where this actually rides in the bore inside the caliper. You can see right there's kind of a little rough spot by my thumb, and I might be able to clean that up with just a little bit of emery cloth or something, some sandpaper. This is pretty smooth. I don't see any major scratches or gouges. These pistons look really good. They look fairly new, so this may have been replaced at some point, or it just may have been flushed really well. A lot of times you'll see some pitting and you'll see some corrosion on these things from where they just have water in the brake fluid, or just get exposed to the outside atmosphere. As far as the bores go, and it's kind of hard to see because they are coated with something, some sort of, I don't know if it's like a Teflon coating or what it is. If it's paint, I'm not really sure, but the bores look really good. I'll douse this down with some brake sparks cleaner before I throw this into the blast booth, and then I'm going to be really careful about how I tape this off. So this is your outer seal. It's got a lip on it, and it drops into this lip right here. Obviously, it expands out around the piston. You could see it move when I was putting some pressure on it. And then this is your inner seal. This is the part that actually sits inside the groove right there inside the caliper, right there where my finger is. And then that's kind of what seals it against the piston from the fluid coming out. Both of these two combined, that's pretty much all there is in a rebuild kit. You get your inner, your outer seals. I would imagine you might get a bleeder screw. You may get new hardware. A lot of the stuff I can clean up. Like this is the pin that holds it on. It's got a washer and a little E-clip that holds this into the bracket. There's a couple of crush washers. I don't know if you saw, this one came off and actually got stuck to my air nozzle. I'll probably go ahead and replace those because there's one on the bolt. And one cool thing I'll mention about the bolts, this is called a Banjo Bolt. You can see there's a hole right there in the bolt next to that washer, and then the bolt is actually hollow, so the fluid actually passes through this bolt, goes from that hose into a groove, through the bolt, into the caliper. Really small tolerances. They're easily contaminated with stuff. So we'll probably clean those up and see if we can get new bolts. And then from here, I'll start on the right caliper and get it cleaned up as best as I can too. I need to go ahead and get these last 2 pistons out of that caliper and then get those seals off and get it ready for blasting and cleanup. The right front caliper is now completely disassembled and ready for cleanup, and then it'll go into the blast booth along with the other caliper and the brackets. I won't be blasting the pistons. I'll clean those up in the parts washer, set them aside. Really don't want to do anything to the sides of the pistons that could scar them or scratch them or anything like that. That's where the pressure rides against that seal and moves the pad outward. So we don't want to do anything with those other than wash them up and hopefully get some of that paint off of them. Not that it matters, it's just an aesthetic thing to me. I don't like the paint on there. So these will be powder coated in black. I've got a local guy that's going to do that, and hopefully I can keep any debris and dirt and stuff from getting down in these bores while I'm cleaning this up and blasting it. And once I'm done with that, I will locate the rebuild kit. These things used to be available at pretty much every major parts store retailer, so I'll have to research and find out if they still sell them, and then I'll link that in the description on the next video. Hopefully you guys have found this useful. I'm just using some basic hand tools here to disassemble these calipers. We're using a 90-degree pick, a pair of needle nose pliers, a flat bladed screwdriver, and a 10mm socket on a ratchet. That's all you need to take these things apart. Now, when I go to put them back together, I'll do a much detailed video on how they go together, how to put these pistons back in the right way. You don't scratch them or scar up or mess up the bores. And then from there, we'll be able to put these back on the car. They're going to be perfectly powder coated, rebuilt, and ready to go. Hopefully you guys have found this useful. If you did so, please give me a like and comment down below if you have any comments on the video. Until the next time, stay gloved up.